Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to the Oldie lunch today. We've got three terrific speakers sponsored by the wonderful cruise company, Noble Caledonia, crucially very small ships, and I'm here in the footsteps of the late great Barry Fryer, whose jokes still account for a third of the Oldie's website traffic. And here's his favourite Paris joke. Standing for Barry, and Barry said, I'm currently touring in an underwater version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's called Ringing in the Seine. Our first speaker's new book has been very widely reviewed with much praise. Angela V. John is professor at Swansea University. She's written biographies of the suffragettes, Lady Rhonda, Elizabeth Robbins, and the war correspondent Henry Nevinson. And her latest book is about the adoptive father of Richard Burton. It's called Behind the Scenes, The Dramatic Lives of Philip Burton. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela V. John.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and lovely to be here. The story could have been invented for the Oldie. Here was a man who had remarkable cross-continent and richly spanning 20th century. An Edwardian born in 1904, thank you, born in 1904 in Mountain Ash in South Wales. He died aged 90 in Florida in 1995. He'd emigrated to the States in his 50th year, and the older he got, the happier he seemed to become. Some years ago, as has just been mentioned, I wrote the biography of the war correspondent Henry Nevinson, and he was also a champion of causes. And the elderly but still spry and courageous Nicholson joked that he'd founded a League of Age with the motto, the older the bolder. Philip Burton, who reinvented himself a number of times, seemed to exemplify that motto. When directing plays in America, he commented that he was getting older but feeling younger. As a young schoolmaster at one of Port two grammar schools, Sir had been formal, a little aloof, studious and rather plump. He wore dark suits and sported a gown in school. In his 70s and 80s, however, he revelled in the artistic and relaxed life of Key West, was slim, clad in shorts and sandals, and relished the sunshine. He hosted endless chalet parties, played a very active part in Key West's cultural and gay life, and took long, early morning walks. When a British television producer visited Philip to make a programme about him, he accompanied the 87-year-old on one of these walks and, quote, soon had him panting in his wake. Today, Philip is best known as a schoolmaster who trained and transformed his pupil, young Richard Jenkins, into Richard Burton, the legendary actor, who took his name and became his legal ward. 2025 marks the centenary of Richard Burton's birth and the year in which Philip began teaching. This period of his life is the subject of the powerful feature film Mr. Burton, in which Toby Jones plays the teacher, and I was a sort of consultant on the film. My biography provides some corrective to his drama, but certainly expands the story, focusing on the perspectives of Philip Burton. And I've also been helped by the fact that I come originally from Port myself, and I knew Richard Burton and his extended family well. I show how the backgrounds of the two Burtons were actually quite similar. Philip was also a coal miner's son from the Welsh valleys, and he too lost a parent when young. Both grew up in poverty, yet whereas Richard was brought up by a loving older sister and her husband, and boasted a large, close-knit family, Philip's childhood was really a very lonely one, deprived in several senses. When he was only 14, his father, whom he adored, was killed in a pit accident. He was never close to his mother, and his only sibling was a half-brother, 18 years older and already a collier. Education was Philip's passport. Scholarships to grammar school, then university. He won the latter, by the way, when he was just 16 to read pure maths. All this spelt social mobility. By the age of 20, he secured the post in Portugal, where a great love of drama, first nurtured in Mountain Ash, when visiting theatre companies, saw him throw his energies into anything to do with drama. And so there were school productions, and his head teacher transferred him from the maths department to teaching English, and he inspired many budding actors, not just Richard Jenkins. He gained a foothold in BBC radio drama, which gave his pupils, as well as himself, exciting opportunities to use their talents. He acted in and wrote plays, 2 of which have recently been revived. And at the end of the war, he left school teaching to become the features producer at BBC in Cardiff, when radio was at its height. He worked on just under 200 programmes in Cardiff and London, and was the producer of Dylan Thomas's Return Journey. He even wrote the first TV soap opera. In London, Philip lived within walking distance of Richard's home and continued to give him advice, working behind the scenes with the actor before his classic Shakespearean roles at the Old Vic and Stratford, then later in the States. He would, for example, play a part in helping prepare him for what became Richard's iconic Hamlet on Broadway in 1964. Some of you might have seen the motive of the cue. It does acknowledge Philip as Richard's father there, but adopted father, but it doesn't actually mention the part he played helping him come to terms with Gielgud's interpretation of Hamlet, which then became, of course, the classic Broadway Hamlet, where Richard starred in it. He then, Philip, set up a drama school called Amden, the American. He set up a drama school that still flourishes today in New York. He also directed some plays, in fact, Sean O'Casey's most successful play. And I've listened to many of Philip's lectures when he was running the drama school, and he really captivated students with erudite, yet always lively accounts of dramatists and their work, enhanced by not only his deep knowledge, but also his experience of acting and directing. His great love was Shakespeare, and he delivered sparkling performance lectures on the Bard right across the States. He wrote a fascinating novel about Shakespeare's brother and a book called The Soul Voice, case studies of Shakespearean characters, primarily for actors. My biography of this stage-struck man draws on Philip Burton's previously unseen personal papers. It unfolds a story that's far more varied, unexpected, and dramatic, in more ways than one, than has previously been appreciated. Working on the book has been revelatory for me with never a dull moment, and I'm thrilled that at last Philip Burton can emerge from behind the scenes and take centre stage as a 20th century transatlantic cultural figure in his own right. And I'll end with a passage from Philip's time as an oldie in Key West, when he gave immensely popular annual lectures, lecture recitals really, with the proceeds going to his local church. In 1978, it was the turn of Macbeth, and I'm reading here from it's a passage from the book. It was preceded by an exhausting week in which he spent 10 hours dealing with press interviews and was so tired that he came close to counselling. He was in his mid to late 70s at this point. Yet it was one of his greatest triumphs. Standing erect, hands clasped behind his back, he was received with tumultuous applause and a standing ovation from the 1,000-strong audience to whom he gave a dramatic bow. Philip was on stage for almost 2 hours, speaking without notes and non-stop about Macbeth, acting out speeches from different characters to illustrate his arguments and loving every minute of it. The press reported that to hear Philip Burton on stage is to be completely mesmerised. The next year, his lecture on Lear raised $10,000. Richard Burton, who planned to play Lear in the not-too-distant future, of course that never happened, spent 5 hours on the telephone to Philip discussing his plans for playing Lear. He also wrote to Philip, telling him that word of his enormous success had reached him from many sources. He added, "I smiled modestly and said I taught you all you knew. I tell people you don't do anything as common as lecture, that we must coin a new word for what you do to that audience. I tell them that you explode with more passion in one lecture than I do in 10 performances at Hamlet. What should we call them? Lecture Agonistis Passionata? Impressive on a billboard, don't you think?"
Thank you so much, Angela, for a fascinating talk. Our next speaker is one of our leading writers, particularly about nature. Adam Nicholson's written The Seabird's Cry and The Sea Room, but he's also written God's Secretaries, The Making of the King James Bible, and The Mighty Dead about Homer. He's the grandson of the writers Peter Sackville West and Sir Harold Nicholson, thus in writing a terrific book, Sissinghurst, An Unfinished History. And his new book is Bird School, The Beginner in the Wood. Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Nicholson.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. You went last here 10 years ago, I think, talking about Sissinghurst. So greatly looking forward to this lovely lunch. But then I had the awkward experience online, the meeting talking to the great Peter York. Peter. I said I've written a book about birds in the wood having sausages. And Peter said, all very good, I suppose, but I'm not interested in nature. Going up to that? Yes, he does. He knows. Anyway, that really, funny enough, is exactly what my book is about. That for most of my life, I mean, the great editor says that I'm a nature writer, but actually I spent most of my life writing about literature and history. And for most of it, have really paid very little attention to the birds around us. And I remember I was making a radio program a few years ago with a great friend of mine, Burton, about Homer. We were on the plain of Troy. I'm sure no one can remember the sense there, but I'm sure Troy. And I was blathering away into his woody microphone, as one does. His name for me was Senior Waffle. Waffling away. Anyway, and he said, Adam, there's a woodlark singing above me. And I said, yes, very good. So I went on about Homer, Achilles, and a lark was. No, not a lark, a woodlark, Adam. So I said, yes, and so here on the plain of Troy, the larks are singing. And I remember his face, a sort of total disenchanted impatience with the idiocies of people who don't care about nature. because about nature is exactly what has led to one of our current catastrophes. Nature is in the most terrible condition. 60% of all wild vertebrate animals have died in the last 50 years. And the graph is still heading downwards. And really the root of that destruction has been the kind of attitudes of the great Mr. York. In working. You could have a moment of answering this. You could have 3 or 5 minutes. No, not now. Not now. I'm sure you know this, and he can't be kept down. Quiet for now. Is that right? Anyway, so I felt reproached by my friend. I'd written a book about seabirds, as Harry said, and seabirds are very easy to know, aren't they? Those of us who've been on probably know Caledonia. They're big, loud, heraldic, obvious, they don't mind you. But the birds in the wood, the birds in the garden, the birds in the fields, they fly away. And actually some very good science has been done about this, that birds hate being looked at. Did you know that? Especially looked at with 2 eyes. If you hold a hand over one eye, you can get much, much closer to the bird. For the one very good reason that 2 eyes, the 2 eyes are the eyes of the predator. They're the eyes that can triangulate their pounce on the game. And so I decided the way to do something about this was to build a hide. Most people say, if you're interested in birds, get a pair of binoculars. But actually a pair of binoculars is incredibly distant, by definition distant. And in fact the hide is the way to be as close to them as you will love to hear them. So I built a hide in the wood, a very nice hide, up on stilts. So it was up in the trees rather than down the road. About as big in floor plan as one of these tables. And in the walls of it, it was octagonal. I built a series of nest boxes. But with the key thing that the nest boxes, their inside wall, the wall that faced into the hive, was made of glass with a little door on each of them, so that I could actually inspect the birds nesting. And I went there this morning just to check before coming here. There are 18 baby birds currently in my hive. So, it looks rather like an observatory, this building. But I called it in the book, not an observatory, not a thing to sort of inspect with eyes like an absorbatory. A place you can sit in and soak it up. And that really is what, apart from being attacked on York, the book is about the absorbency of true attitude to the natural world. Don't impose, let it come, be with it, see what it means, see what it has to tell you. And so I sat in there the first morning, January, a couple of years ago. I was sitting in there thinking, yes, well, here I am to absorb. And suddenly, right next to me, inside the birdhouse, appeared a wren. A wren on my table, on my desk, just there like that, dancing around. As I'm sure you'll know, you're all great naturalists here, aren't you? Anyway, the wrens like to hide from cold weather. They're so small. They very easily die in cold weather. Huge wren deaths in winter. 40, 50, 60% of wrens die in cold winter. And so wrens come in. John Clare, the great Northamptonshire poet, used to write about wrens living in the shepherd's hut when he was a shepherd's boy in early 19th century Northamptonshire. And so the wren had come in and was dancing around me and living with me and surviving because of my shed. So I became very, very intrigued by the life of the wren. And wrens die terribly in winters. And the reason there were still so many wrens, there were 11 million wren territories. The reason is that they are absolutely driven by lust. There is no more lustful creature in the natural world. And the way that they, the way that they make their lust effective in the world is that the male wren, every early spring, March, goes around his little territory, 1.5 acres or something like that, building lots and lots of nests, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 different nests scattered around his territory. He then finds a Mrs. Wren floating by, or Miss Wren, and says to her, "Look, I made some marvellous nests. Would you come here?" And he introduces her and sings outside the nest and says, "Do you like this one? Or there's one over there that I can show you." It's a very nicely made one over in that bush there. And after a while, she chooses one and then quite literally feathers the nest. So she chooses nest 5, say. And Mr. Wren very happy. They do what everyone needs to do to fertilize eggs, and she starts laying them in nest 5. Mr. Wren, his spring is not over. He then finds another Miss Wren. Says, "I've got lovely nests. There are 6. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. Can I show you?" And so she then chooses 1, 2, and as a result, the wren population having sunk terribly in winter, booms at this point. Tell me if I'm done. 1 more minute. So, that's the kind of thing, in other words, the knowledge that these creatures have rich, complex, fascinating, various, independent lives all around us that the book I've written is about. That it is actually an incredible sort of realm of richness surrounding us, which I, Peter, have ignored. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. Our last speaker is probably the most recognisable voice on telly in the last 50 years. Sir Trevor MacDonald began at ITV in 1973. In 1992, he became sole presenter of News at 10, and he is still presenter tonight with Trevor MacDonald and a series of documentaries for ITV. His latest book is about his first love, his favourite sport. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Trevor MacDonald on cricket.
Thank you very much. I think first of all, I'd like to say, and may I do this on behalf of the two of the speakers this afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting us to a splendid lunch. And if I could be slightly personal for one moment, if ever on any other Tuesdays in the rest of the year, you find it terribly difficult to get some guests. You know where I live. So please feel free to invite me again. I would like to say genuinely thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Oldie for hosting this lunch. Writing about cricket is really almost a part of West Indian life. One of the things I wanted to explore in this book was how it came to be that a game which was really formed and bred and developed and became such an institution in another distant world became such a part of West Indian life. And I'm not too sure I ever found the answer to that question. But I've had several examples of how extraordinary it still is. I remember many, many years ago when I was doing something other than writing about cricket. I was sent to Lebanon and I was in Beirut working at a time when there was a raging civil war. Raging civil wars and my personality don't go very close to each other because I'm a born coward and I hated guns. I hated the sound of guns. I'd never heard a bomb go off in my life, and yet there was in the middle of Beirut and trying to deal with these things and trying to report in a fairly dispassionate and accurate way what was going on all around me. Whenever I went to these places, my parents, especially my mother, who'd never been very much out of the West Indies and found places like Beirut and so on really too far distant in the imagination to even contemplate. My preoccupation was trying to assure them, because we still had great love for each other, that I was in no danger. This was entirely untrue. It was very, very dangerous. But the way news went around in those days, still goes around more now, I felt I should always pretend that things were not that way. And I would always call my mother and say, you know, I'm doing something abroad, but it's pretty safe. And it's a bit of a holiday, really. I'm no danger. So I would call up and I would say, Mom, thinking the danger of this place already gone around the world in numerous ways. And I would call my mother and say, Mom, I'm in Beirut. And there'd be a pause. And she would say, but how could the West Indies do that? and it took me a little bit to work out what she was getting on about. And the West Indies had beaten, India had beaten the West Indies at Lords at cricket. And my mother, not concerned about my being in Beirut, was concerned about how the West Indies would allow themselves to beat at Lords. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to readjust the tone of this conversation. Because to be very honest, in Beirut, for once in my life, I couldn't care what the hell West Indies were up to. I was much more concerned about my own life. And then I remember again how much this ethic of cricket and everything about it had seeped into the soul of the West Indies. I was doing some documentaries in the Caribbean, and I was at the airport. I ran into Dwight York, who played football for somebody. Great man. And he said to me, "What are you doing?" He said, "I tell you what, there is a party this evening at Brian Larnell's house, and you must come." And I probably said yes. I always said that to get a discussion of whether I could actually do it or not. And I had work to do, so I didn't go. I happened, rather unfortunately, to be speaking to my sister, who lives in Trinidad, and I said to her, "Do you know, yesterday I met Dwight York at the airport, and he said, there's a party at Brian Larnell's house, and we could come, and I was working, so I couldn't go." And my sister almost declaimed me as part of it. I was almost cut off from the family connection, because she said, "How could you not go to Brian Larnell's house?" And I had no answer. I said I was working. But as I say, my relation to my sister almost broke off there because I didn't go to MacDonald's house. And to me, it was not an indication of how this thing about cricket seeped into the soul of West Indians. And then, much more important to me, really, and in 1962, I came to London as a junior reporter from Trinidad to report on Trinidad's independent conference. This was a rather strange thing. It was a Bulgar house, and we had little offices on the wings of Bulgar house, but away from the main conference. And at the end of each day, I was working for a radio station. I was supposed to provide a 10-minute report each night about what was happening at this conference. And the problem was, at the end of the day, there was a communique from the Bulgar House conference, and it said the Trinidad and Tobago delegation met members of the Commonwealth Foreign Office, and they discussed methods by which Trinidad might eventually become an independent country. Lots of issues were discussed, and they'll meet again tomorrow. And I was supposed somehow to find a 10-minute report out of this. This was absolutely impossible, and I was totally unable and incompetent to do this. But as luck would have it, I got to know someone called Larry Constantine, who was a Trinidadian and who had come to the Lancashire meeting with Nicholson, I think it was, and became one of the most famous names of cricket in the world. And I would go to him with him at the end of the day, and I would persuade Larry Constantine, who was a very discreet and professional man, and not given to idle talk. But I would try to get from him exactly what went on, and try to frame or to expand this into a 10-minute report for the radio station. Larry was very cautious, but gradually he told me bits and bits, and I was able to survive. And I'm always grateful, because I think my survival almost as a journalist at that meeting, at that conference, was due to the great Larry. And then at the end of the conference, I met the person who was eventually to become the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams. And he said to me, what have you been sending back to London, to Trinidad, about reports of this conference in London? And I was very discreet and trying to aid the discretion of Larry Constantine. And I said, oh, Prime, not very much, I didn't know what was going on. I had very little to report on. And I don't think my reports contain very much info. That's not what I hear. He said, my brother says that everybody in Trinidad is listening to your reports every night. If that is actually so, and I don't know what it was, that was nothing to do with me at all, but to do with the greatness and the charm and the kindness of Larry Constantine. And then Eric Williams himself went back to Trinidad, carrying on the theme of Trinidad becoming an independent country. And he had meetings in a square in Trinidad, which before Spain, the capital, which was called Woodford Square. But when he went, he was an Oxford graduate, he got a PhD in Oxford. And so this common square became the University of Woodford Square, and he addressed the crowds there. And his theme was, just after 1950, his theme was, if the West Indies could beat the English at cricket, as they had done in 1950, they could govern themselves. Now, quite frankly, that was political nonsense, a lot of which one hears today. It had nothing but, as a slogan, as a political slogan, it was a very good one. So it was used, and I thought that was an apt demonstration of what cricket could bring to the discourse about entire West Indian life. So that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm terribly, terribly grateful to you for inviting us here today. And again, on behalf of the other people who have spoken today, thank you so much for asking us here. And if on Tuesday evening, you have any vacancies for lunch, please give me a call. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Thanks so much for all three of our wonderful speakers who will be signing their books, not where they were before lunch, but just outside these double doors here. Noble Caledonia are so generous they give us a raffle prize as well, and the winner is Mr. I've got the right, Mr. David Patterson from collect your prize from where we were before lunch. Thank you all so much for coming to the Oldie lunch. Thanks so much.